In today's session, I'm going to introduce the concept of logic frameworks for designing and developing a project. Often when you think of logic frameworks, we think of words like inputs, activities, outcomes. What will the impact be of the activities that we're implementing? It suggests something sequential. It suggests something logical, that if we do this, we'll get this output and we get this outcome, and eventually there will be this impact that we're looking for. It does suggest a degree of control and confidence in our activities. But I would propose that it's better to think of project management as a form of art, a coming and going, a certain randomness to it. And you bring that randomness to a logic framework that it can actually work for you. Now, my inspiration for this is a gentleman by the name of Philip Cox. He wrote the book Splash and Ripple, using outcomes to design and manage community-based projects. I attended a workshop of his in the UK several years ago, and he was quite expansive about how to engage the community when developing projects. He was expansive about being flexible in your approach, while at the same time using a logic framework to give you a picture in time about how you might achieve certain outcomes and impact the community. So when you look at a logic framework, I'll just put one up in front of you now. You'll see that the ingredients are, if you start on the left-hand side, there's a situation assessment of the community. It is, what are the conditions in the community now? What are the factors that drive the community? If you're doing something like a literacy project, it might be, what are the literacy rates in certain sectors of the community? How is reading, teaching of reading, how is that implemented? It's getting a good picture of the current situation. And if you go on the far side, you get the impact. And that is, again, is what is the change that you're hoping to see in the community? Now, in the diagram that I have before you, I have both those in green because they speak to the environment in which this project is going to occur. And you'll also notice that I make the left-hand side and right-hand side slightly larger because your project is within the community. The community is bigger than any project, and there are other things going on in that community that define it. And it's important to understand that you are one small part of the community, the project that you're running. Right in the middle, you'll see that it's in blue. And this is the part that is actually the project planning part. This is what you do, right? So the blue part is what you're responsible for. And what you're trying to do there in that is identify 4 or 5 major activities that will give an outcome that you believe will impact the society in a positive way. But you can't actually determine how the society will respond to the project. All you can determine is the things that are right in front of you. So you will notice there you have an activity and you have an output. And for each major activity, what is the major output that you're hoping for? And this is something you control. So, for example, again, I refer to literacy. If you're running classes for example, women within a community that have not previously had schooling, you could set up those classes and your output will be something very specific. That out of a class, 50%, for example, might be a measurable outcome. 50% of those women will be able to read in this way at the end of the lesson, or whatever you decide. But the thing is that you can measure that. So each activity has an output and you are responsible for that. So the key in project planning is getting the activities that are most likely to lead to the outcomes that you want that will then impact the community in a good way. So that's what you're responsible for. On the input side, I haven't got that in blue. I've got a mixed color because the input is really about the environment. It's about who in that community can make these activities happen. And for me, that is actually what we call a community-based discussion. It's not a discussion to be had by project managers exclusively from outside that community. There is a process called asset-based community development, where you take the time to find what the strengths of the community are. You take the time to analyse and see what is actually working with that community, because there are many things that are working. Societies function well, even if from the outside perspective you may not understand it. All societies have a way of functioning to achieve their outcomes. So find out what the strengths of the community are. Find out what the strengths of the individuals are. Find out what the processes they are that they already use to make change, for example. And allow that to inform you in terms of how you input into the activities. Allow that to inform you in terms of how to prioritise activities. So this is a very simple framework, but within that framework you can be flexible. So on the left-hand side, situation assessment, it's all about a community engagement. It's all about creating spaces where people can have open conversation, where new ideas can be brought, and you take time to do that. On the input side, it's all about going local first. There is a place for outside input. There is a place for outside funding, but it's in the context of a full discussion about what can already be done within the community and how to best implement the activities. With the activities, it's about identifying 4 or 5 key activities that together you believe will make a difference. Now, these activities the scope of these activities will depend on the time frame of the project. Projects can run over 5 years, they can run over 3 years, they can run over 6 months, they can run over 1 week. The time frame doesn't change the process that's in front of you here. Whether if it's a 1 week project, it's still about situation assessment. What are the best inputs to achieve these activities that we're going to do within that week? Then what do we expect from each activity? And then what are further outcomes that we could expect to occur? And then our hope for the impact long term. Philip Cox used the word splash and ripple, and he described it this way. He said a project is like a stone that you throw into a pond. The project is the splash. And the further out from the splash the ripple occurs, you have less control in terms of what would happen. So in project management, we're concerned to lob the resources and activities into the community that will work and fit and that will give a ripple effect that is for good. Of course, in every project we have the risk of unintended consequences. So one of the principles, I guess, in doing any project is that we shall do no harm. And so as you consider the 4 or 5 activities, each one you want to look at what are the unintended consequences. We wish to do no harm. The project is being implemented for good, to achieve good. So as you work through those projects, it always remains an open conversation about refining them and how you might implement them. Philip Cox described logical framework is more a case of putting a puzzle together. You do a bit here, you work on the impact here, you do a situation assessment, you review this activity that may or may not make a difference. You keep the conversation going, and slowly you solidify a picture of what you're intending to do and what you hope for. And even when you put together that puzzle, it is a puzzle that is set at a point in time. And so you need to always be open to further conversation and refinement. I've experienced that myself. I know I was within a project in the Creole project in an Aboriginal community in the Northern Territory. This was back almost 40 years ago. And one of our goals, outcomes we were hoping for, was that the language would gain wider acceptance in the public domain, that the language was not just spoken around the camp, but it would be respected as a language in the public domain. And we were looking to achieve those outcomes by introducing certain activities. Like for us, we were doing a reading of the scriptures, teaching people how to read the newly translated Bible, so they could use it within the church domain. And so we had a list of activities to achieve the outcome we were hoping for. And then one day I noticed that the men were sitting around playing their guitars, and they were talented with their music. And I've gone, wow, music. They just love their music. And I thought, why don't we run a songwriters workshop in the local language and in the Aboriginal languages around the area, so that we have music in that domain, not just English songs. Then we went one step further. Well, it is about respecting and honouring this language. So when we have this songwriters workshop, we set up a sound studio, and let's produce the highest quality songs that we can, in those days on what was called a cassette. So we established that. And because it's about respecting the language and celebrating it, perhaps we could put a concert on in a prison in Darwin, and one out in the community. So it went from, oh, they're really good at music, to let's have a songwriters workshop, to let's record the highest quality songs we can, to let's go public and have a concert in the prison. It wasn't in my list of activities to do, but it fitted in with the longer term outcomes we hope for. So we put aside the activities we had for the next 3 months, and we ran this songwriters workshop. It drew 45 people doing it. We got a cassette with a whole lot of songs in it, and we sold 2,000 cassettes up and down the highway between those communities. It fed right into the outcome. So even when you put together a logic framework, even when the activities appear to be the best choice at this point in time, you put all the pieces together, the puzzle fits beautifully, it's still an art form. You still got to be ready to refine it. You still need to be ready to change the activities when an activity is apparent that will fit beautifully in with the impact that you're hoping to do. So that's the art of logic framework. It gives you a logical sequence, but at the same time, you're free to adapt for new conversation, for new possibilities, but you still have a clear plan in terms of what you're hoping to achieve.